Hi everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Jennifer Szeto. I am a pianist and co-founder at Musique Trois Femmes, and alongside our partners Opera 5 and Opera Makenzie, I want to welcome you to OperaCon. It's a digital pop-up which is connecting students, artists, and innovation and opera, and also connecting you to them. So we have today a talk in two parts in collaboration with the Canadian Opera Company, which is exploring their new commission, Fantasma. We've lined up two incredible panels of esteemed speakers and creators. I will let them introduce themselves momentarily. But before we do so, I just want to acknowledge that this conversation is being broadcast in part from Jojake, more commonly known as Montreal, which is situated on unceded Indigenous territory. We want to acknowledge that this site historically served as an important place for diplomacy and exchange. And today it is home to a very diverse population of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. So we just want to extend a welcome to all those, past, present, future, that come to join us. So to kick things off, here's Julie McIsaac.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie McIsaac. I'm Director and Dramaturg in Residence at the Canadian Opera Company, and you'll meet the rest of the folks that are here in just a little while. We're very honored to be here, and we just wanted to acknowledge and let everyone know that we're calling in from territory a bit further east. So the site of human activity for thousands of years and the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So we're calling in from Toronto, and we're very pleased to be here. Thanks for having us.
My name is Colleen Murphy, and I'm the librettist of the opera that we have created called Fantasma.
I'm Ian Cusson, and I am the composer on Fantasma.
I'm Alex Soloway. I'm a pianist and coach in the COC's ensemble studio. And when we were workshopping, I was working a lot with Ian and Julie directly, and Colleen on the music for this wonderful new opera.
So maybe to start us off, Colleen, could you tell us a little bit about the origins of this new opera and kind of the basic shape of the project?
Yes, so I met Ian at a Lib Lab in 2018, and he approached me in 2019 to write the libretto for the opera for young audiences for the COC. And so we sort of put our heads together right away, and the sort of theme of what we wanted to do was about lost children, or children struggling to find their parents or their home. And I have to say this, as a playwright, I always, unless I'm working with cultural consultation, I always work completely by myself. But in opera, I've always worked from the get-go with the composer, because it's not a single piece of mine. It's expressed through music. So Ian and I started working together right away as soon as we started talking about lost children. And so Ian, we had a couple of stabs at it, and I have to say the first couple of stabs that I took were pretty embarrassing because that's just how I work. I work from a place of not knowing what the hell I'm doing, and but we had a lot of fun doing crazy things with what first started off as an opera called Pinky. And I think some folks at the COC were pretty horrified when they read it. But that's sort of that was our starting point. And then we started looking seriously at the notion of loss. And what Ian brought to the opera right away, which I totally love and agree with, is the notion that young people should not protect young people from powerful and sometimes disturbing stories, that you have to respect their humanity, even though they're young. And he was very adamant about this from the get-go. And for me, this was exciting as a place to build this opera from.
Amazing. I'm kind of curious, how does a story lend itself to opera? What are some of the What are some of the things to consider when creating an opera from scratch? Ian, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Sure thing. I think, like any great story, something that has deep resonance, and in particular, I think what opera does so well is capture an emotional landscape. And so when I think about stories that would work well in opera, I think about stories that are dramatically interesting, even if they're quiet stories in terms of not a lot of action happening per se, but they're emotionally resonant stories where we are sort of seeing into the lens of human emotion. I think great stories or stories that make great opera include a high level of specificity. So you're really seeing specific people in a specific setting, in a specific world, but then at the same time exploring the resonances that can be felt across culture. And I think you only get these wider human resonances when you have an extreme specificity of story, place, character.
Yeah, I certainly, I had the pleasure of reading through a copy, a draft of the libretto, and certainly from the get-go, from the opening lines, you really get a sense of we're placing these characters very clearly. Julie, do you want to talk a little bit about the characters that are involved in this story and what sorts of characters appear in Fantasma?
Absolutely, I'd love to. And just before I do, Jen, what I might do is let the folks know who are listening that the commission that Ian and Colleen were given from the COC, it's a really interesting situation in that content-wise, they had this freedom to explore and then to see where they were, what they were pulled toward. But at the same time, there were some parameters in the sense that this is an opera for young audiences. We knew that the duration needed to be about 45, 50 minutes. So it's this beautiful tension, I guess, between freedom and form, like set form. So that's something that I've been aware of during this process. And I just think it's just an interesting set of circumstances to grapple with, like the combination of those two things. Yeah, and in terms of characters, I think, when I think of opera for young audiences, it's the sense of, can these young people see themselves in the characters that are going to be presented to them? And so we have two best friends, Leia and Ivy, who are both young teenagers, and they live in an urban environment, so like Toronto, and they end up at this carnival called Macaroni's Carnival. That's sort of a traveling carnival that can show up in one city one day and then be in another city another day. And they're there with Leia's mom and then Leia's baby brother. So mom really wants to, we get the impression that she's a single mom, that things are a bit tough. And so she wants to make happy memories for Antoine. So she takes the girls to this carnival, even though maybe, it's something they feel they're aging out of, or it's a bit babyish and a bit, not as cool as they would like. So they find themselves there, and then there's these characters that are of the carnival, of the world of Macaroni's Carnival, and we get the sense that this carnival's, had some, it's kind of having some tough times in terms of drawing people and making money, and so there's a cast of colorful characters that are there at the carnival and have schemes in terms of how to get more people, and it involves a ghost, and it involves there's all these fun rides that the characters go on. So yeah, I could go. I love these characters. I love them all so much. And there's one we haven't mentioned yet, who's actually a very important character that we might get to in a little bit, who's lurking. I don't know if lurking's the right word, but there's a haunting at this carnival. So there's a dark mystery at the center of it.
Yeah, maybe Alex, you might be the perfect person to talk to us about the specific singer that interprets this role, and maybe what the process was working with that person. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this central character who's lurking but not lurking in the background of this opera is played by a boy soprano. So that was definitely a really cool experience working with a young boy named Peter, who was really wonderful and extremely well prepared, which was a great pleasure for me to go into a first coaching and be like, my goodness, you know your music better than I do. So it was really great. I was actually kind of taken aback by how clearly and specifically he had created the picture of his music in his mind. It was really great. Working with him was really about opening up a dramatic world and walking into the feet of the character that he was playing and making him comfortable doing that also in front of other people. I think me and Peter developed a real rapport, and when it was us in a room, we could experiment and play around with drama. And then we had to do it again with other people in the room, with Ian in the room, with Julie in the room, then with more people, with a bigger audience in the room, just get comfortable with stepping into a character who's doing all these things.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
And how old was the boy Trouble?
12?
12, I think so.
I don't know, I just
Yeah.
think back, like when you were younger, you didn't realize what was at stake, so you were never nervous for anything.
Totally, I remember that.
To that. This just brings up, it reminds me of certain other pieces in the repertoire, Ian, that feature children performers and boy voices. I mean, the most Turn of the Screw, Amal. It really has the opportunity for young people, for them to be able to see themselves on stage. Must be such a resonating experience opera-wise. Can you talk a little bit about your approach in writing for young audiences rather than creating a work for a general kind of adult crowd, and what kind of approach did you take with that?
I think, yeah, Colleen really hit on some of the values that we brought in at the very beginning. When the commission was, we were in discussion about the piece, I said, I absolutely do not want to have anything to do with creating a piece that is saccharine, that speaks down or pejoratively to children, and I want a piece that has the utmost emotional resonance with both young people and with a larger or an older audience as well. So the task of writing for children, I think, is in some ways it's harder. I found this process more difficult, but I think it's because I felt the incredible weight of the responsibility of telling a story. I think children can see through BS. They can, my kids, like I've got some kids, and they say, they'll say to me, "Dad, that's cringy." No, that's cringy. And the cringy means like, I don't buy it for a second. And I think we can fool adults a lot more easily than we can fool children. They're, in some ways, I have maybe greater respect for children than I do adults most of the time. But their capacities, like Colleen mentioned, to grapple with exceedingly complex and difficult scenarios, like even traumas. They have a capacity to explore and create categories of those things that are far more fluid and less rigid. So the process of making the piece in general was one of just wanting to be, to have a resonance and authenticity, however you want to call it, that would resonate with young people. Writing specifically for a boy soprano was a thing that was also a challenge, because here you've got all of these incredibly trained singers in the ensemble studio at the COC that are interpreting the other roles, and some former members of the ensemble. And then you've got this young boy, and you're thinking about textures that are underneath the writing in terms of not drowning the sound out. You're thinking about legibility, like rhythmic legibility, melodic, the capacity to sort of sing these pitches, thinking about like cueing pitches. So I was much more aware of those elements. And in some ways, this boy in this show carries the heart of the piece. I mean, he is literally at the center of the work. He occupies the whole middle section of the work, and he is the emotional heartbeat of the piece, and has a significant aria that is the crux of the work. And so there's a lot of weight put on this young performer's shoulders, and it was about writing well for them. I studied, like I looked back through Turn of the Screw and looked at how Britten was writing for the voice, Amal, like you said, and the Night Visitors, and even like Ignolde in Debussy's Péléas et Mélisande, which is often sung by a soprano, but just sort of imagining how those vocal lines looked and what sort of tessitura and all that kind of thing was being asked of them.
Amazing. Ian, what does, I mean, obviously we were talking about this carnival setting, so there's a lot of potential for great, like really awesome musical ideas, but can you tell us a little bit about this excerpt that we're about to hear? I think it's the trio between the three children.
Yeah. The middle, like I said, of the opera is when the girls get lost in one part of the carnival, and they find themselves in a haunted manor. And there they think they've come across this one character of the circus who is a young boy dressed in a sheet, or a young man dressed in a sheet, whose function is to scare people, to sort of drive up business. And they think they've found him, and they grab the sheet, and they're like, we're going to teach him a lesson. And they go to rip the sheet off him, and realize that the sheet that they've grabbed is actually not coming off. And in fact, they haven't found this this character of the carnival that's dressed as a ghost, but rather they've met a real dead child, a child who has died and lives in this kind of in-between world of the carnival. And this is where the kind of emotional heart of the story really engages. And we learn that he actually is searching for something. He is looking for his grave because he wants to sleep. He wants to rest. And the girl's journey now becomes one of assisting him in that. And so this is a moment after he's told them his story. He's explained how he died, in fact, that he was murdered. And he's now asked them to help him, and they've committed. And so they sing this beautiful little duet, and we call it the promise duet, where they commit to coming back to get him out of the circus and to take him on the journey to find his grave. And this is what we hear.
One of the other things in this opera that's, I guess tricky, it's that it embodies both comedy and tragedy side by side. Again, tough thing to do in 45 minutes, tough thing to do at any time. So we had to see if those things are being accomplished. And at the same time, as both Julie and Ian point out, it's so important that the emotional story of Marcel, particularly in the last, as we come to the end, it just gets offered to the audience with no restraint, and that it has to be meaningful, or it has to work. It has to be emotional in some way. So I can't, well, the three of us, We worked and worked and worked and worked and worked on this opera. Like, we're talking about everything from sentences to shifts in structure to words, like tiny words. So, and we did it because of everything that was coming back to us from the workshop situation on every level.
Alex, as the pianist for the workshops, were there any kind of like reactions that maybe caught you off guard, or any interesting kind of, Ian was saying how honest, how brutally honest kids are sometimes. Just what you were getting back from those workshops.
I don't know if it was necessarily surprises, but I was really taken aback by how consistently people respond unanimously to good ideas. Just seeing like the whole group of us sitting at a table or behind a piano and somebody says, oh, this is, oh, yeah, and start writing things down. There would just be these moments of like, absolutely, that's a thing that we need to take into consideration. That was really great. And also I loved seeing people responding or hearing people responding to what Colleen was just talking about, this mix of drama and comedy. And I just want to point out that actually there's a really great example of that at the end of the trio that we were just listening to when one of the girls apologizes to Marcel for having tried to pull off his skin. And it's just a great little moment of levity in the world of a very serious scene, and they're making this great promise. Yeah, it was fun hearing responses to those great moments.
Yeah. Julie, did you have something you wanted to add as well? You said you were gonna.
Well, just the, like, it was really great because we've had the opportunity to have educators in the room and to have young people in the room, and also to have the members of the ensemble studio. So Alex and his colleagues, it's been really great. And of course, members of the education team at COC, so the community programs and partnerships, or it might be community program partnerships and programs. I always mix that up. But to have all those different voices, and for them to be there to remind us, like, oh, this young person might interpret it like this, or this educator might then have this question for their classroom and how they're going to debrief with the kids afterwards. So just to remind us about all the various things in play, and then for us to then with Ian and Colleen, for then us to go, okay, what do we want to address in terms of what's in the libretto and the score, and what is a conversation that we'll have with staff at the COC in terms of how do they prepare educators to bring their students. So just the different, not to say that it's siloed, but just to go, who's responsible for what, who's going to take on what, like what's resonating for Ian and Colleen is something they want to engage with and that they feel compelled to engage with in terms of their artistic vision for this piece. And then what do other team members feel compelled to engage with? So a real team effort. And having all those voices in the room in the workshopping process has helped us approach it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that will likely come up in the second part of our talk with the COC with Sarah and her team, but certainly you're dealing with some really tricky subject matter, and so there's also a responsibility there to take care of the young people that are experiencing this work. And Ian and Colleen, is that something that we talked about what to put in and what to leave out, and was there at any point that you guys felt like you wanted to bring something back, or that it was a bit too much, or?
I don't know that I felt at any time that it was too much for young people. It was really a question of how do we offer it moment by moment, emotionally, and but I mean, certainly one must you have to think like a young person. You have to go back to when you were 12 and see how it lands in you. So the notion of, I mean, it's a fine line, and as you point out, you protect young people, but you can't protect them to a point where you're limiting their emotional engagement in art. Because if you do that, you're not going to have them going to opera or theater in 15 years. Mm-hmm. Something has to hit them, and you have to allow that, even though that may be momentarily disturbing or upsetting. Of course, their teacher, there will be, things in place to talk about it, but that's the whole essence of art. And if we take that away, under the guise of protecting and safety, why bother? I mean, why are we doing this?
Yeah, it seems like something that's so unique and special, and that maybe young audiences are not going to be used to seeing at all. And that's a really special aspect of this project for sure. Yeah. What are you hoping from each of you? What are you hoping that the audiences come away with besides this experience of you know, seeing something that is real, that it's raw, that it's emotional? Ian, I know you said you had kids. Like, have they seen the piece, and what are some thoughts from them? What's the feedback?
They've heard it. I mean, they hear me banging away at it from my studio, and so and often are sitting in the room with me while I'm doing it. But I've talked with them about the story, and it's funny. I shared this with Colleen. Oh, I can't remember how many months ago. It was in a version 1.5 where we were really still fleshing out elements of the story. And one of my daughters, who's 11, she said she had this philosophy of how there was this other dark underbelly to the circus. Like, this character had murdered the boy and it had happened this. And she was like, this is a brilliant idea. Like, you got to offer it to your little librettist because this is how it should happen. And I was like, and it was funny. We chatted about how her perception of the work and her capacity to go to a place. I mean, she's my daughter, so maybe it makes sense, but she had this capacity to go to a very, very painful, dark place, and sort of did it without batting an eye, and it made dramatic sense to her. We didn't end up going with her idea. It would have made it maybe a little too we would have gone a little too far with that.
Yeah, well, the Bosses, Fantasma, the sequel, Revenge of Marcel.
Oh, that's it. It's the horror opera at that point.
I love it. Anecdotally, and this has been the case for me with all great theater through the rest of my life. When I was a little kid, I saw Les Mis, and it was the first musical theater experience that had me just edge of my seat the whole time as a little kid, just I was obsessed. And according to my mother, for the whole rest of the evening when we got home, I just couldn't stop talking about it. I just wanted to talk about every dimension of what I had seen and what was going on. And I think that's basically it. And that's still what I hope for with theater, for myself and for everybody else that I go to the theater with today, is just that it will have been stimulating enough that we'll want to talk about it afterwards. Talk about the dramatic repercussions, if it has different sides, the philosophical or ethical repercussions, or just talk about characters that we felt connections to or lack of connection to, anything, just a stimulation that makes you walk away and you're just chattering. You just want to talk about it.
I saw the Jane Eyre musical that was done in Toronto, I guess in the 90s. And so I was around the age of Leia and Ivy, the two, central characters in the piece. And I remember the collar of my shirt being completely wet with tears. I just wept. I just wept throughout the entire final 25, 30 minutes of it. So it's I was profoundly moved, emotionally. It just sort of rocked me. And I think that's part of the reason that it stayed with me. And that's part of the reason it's one of the seminal sort of experiences I had in the theater, is because it engaged me on that deep emotional level. Like you're saying, Colleen, if we hope that these young people will return to the theater, to opera in future, we need to get them in that place. We need to move them there. We need to access that center.
Yeah, because we somehow wrongly of late are under the impression that the job of theater or music or opera is to teach children moral lessons or to teach them safety lessons. And that's absolute crap. It has no business. It has no business in the art form.
Well,
agreed 100%.
I find myself now thinking about these are also young people who are witnessing and experiencing the pandemic. We're living through these times where young people are facing things, isolation and challenges that that young people 5 years ago weren't facing. So I think we need to respect the fact that by the time they meet this production, they will have lived through that. And we need to meet them there at that place of experience and maturity.
Yeah, and loss, we're all mourning, I think at different levels, at different ages, we're all mourning proximity.
Totally.
Our loved ones, our grandparents, our friends. Yeah. Ian, do you want to talk a little bit, let's loop back and talk a little bit about this collaboration. Just want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, this process was incredible, and I think especially when you have lived on the inside of it, the perspective that you might have if you hadn't kind of walked through what Alex, Julie, Colleen, myself, and the rest of the team have walked through, you might assume that this is the brilliance of, you know, one or two creators, when in reality it is an extremely collaborative art form. It is the brilliance of many minds that come together to make a work. I mean, just in terms of the one part, like the relationship between Colleen and I, Colleen is such a generous librettist in that she invited me into every element of the development process. We had incredible, some of the best phone conversations. I wish I recorded them so I could like listen back to them, where we would ask each other questions and we would toss ideas around and, well, what if this and what if that? And we talked about the world and our lives. And I mean, it was incredible, but we were generating this space, this reality together. And then similarly, when the project was at a different stage and I was writing music for it, we were talking about questions of pacing and why this, and is this resonating, and is this, you know, landing the way we did, or intention or emotional motivation of a character in a specific moment. But then beyond that little bubble of the two of us, which is kind of like a marriage, you know, or like we're like siblings, we're twins in one sense, that we both kind of complete each other in some way. There's Julie, who is asking us a whole other set of dramatic questions and making these offers to us to explore that world further. We had the incredible teams at the COC that were providing a different lens into the world. I think of the conversations I had with Alex when we were in workshops, you know, just, you know, simple observations like, you know, that chord, if you respelled it this way, it would make a lot more sense to my brain in terms of reading it. It's like, that makes so much sense. Or I remember one thing is like, we would talk a lot about the challenges of entrances for singers, especially if it's notated like, you know, after the downbeat, you've got a little rest and then they have to come in. It provides a particular challenge. Those were all incredible offers that he gave me that makes the score so much better. At the end of the day, the sad part in all of this, without like the conversation we're having right now, is you'll go, oh, Ian and Colleen made this great thing. I mean, hopefully we'll call it a great thing when everybody sees it. But and in reality, it's not the case. The other group of people, I mean, there are many, but the other would be the singers. Every single time we sat together, even in libretto read-throughs of the libretto, they were offering questions and thoughts that helped strengthen the story and helped strengthen the structure of the story. And they offered musical suggestions and questions. So nothing that we've done exists in this kind of vacuum. I think we like to think of the canon as, and I'm super passionate about this, so I could go on all day, but we like to think of the canon of opera as being these genius moments. And I question whether that was ever really the case. I think works developed over time in communities, in opera houses that had structures and singers and voices and thoughts, and they all get lumped into the wonders of this composer. And it's like, that's just such a fallacy of the opera creation process. I think I love opera so much, and I love working in this form because it is so incredibly collaborative. It is a team effort. If we ever thought differently about it, I mean, I hope we can correct that misnomer that it's this single creators, one or two people that make a work. It is a team.
I mean, it's amazing to hear because it's really what we see of the show is the tip of the iceberg of all of the work that has gone from all of the members of the team behind that. I'm just kind of curious about timeline. Like when did the libretto, like when did the, you know, conversations start happening around this piece? How long did it take, Colleen, for the libretto to be kind of ready for music setting? And then Ian, how long kind of did it take from there on in?
We started in the spring of 2019, and I guess into the, God, there were so many drafts. Whoa. Someone take it, Ian. So we started in the spring of 2019, and there were many drafts. And when was the first workshop of the reading of the libretto?
I think it was August 2019. It was when the ensemble first came on contract for the 1920 season. So it would have been late August, I guess, Alex?
It was very early on, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we essentially finished, although we still talk about it amongst the three of us, we finished in August, September of 2020. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I guess. So, Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we did a number of reads of the libretto with the ensemble studio, which was incredible because we could work through story issues and certain things. In December 2019, we had our first workshop, which was, I think I wrote like 3 little teeny excerpts of music, and it probably was less than 10 minutes of music in total. And we all got together in a room and sang through it. And it was really the opportunity to explore a sound world, to say, like, is this working? Especially because we're dealing with this juxtaposition of comedy and tragedy. And how do, like, the big question for Colleen, Julie, and I always was, how do those things work together? They're so critical in terms of how they play off one another in this story for it to succeed. And again, in, a 45-minute or 50-minute time window, it's tricky to do. And then in December, January, I think I wrote I wrote the opera so that's early 2020. And we did a workshop in March. And that was of the full first draft of the score, and in a room, and that was wonderful. I did major revisions after that. And in May, we were in lockdown, of course. So we had a scheduled second workshop, and that became a digital workshop. And I'm sure Alex could add to the story of people playing scores in their house, delivering piano music to singers who then added tracks on top, and then the genius team at the COC that like spliced all of it together to get a sense of what the opera was. And then finally, just after that, we did another round of revisions, and those included musical revisions and textual revisions. And that was all done in consultation, especially Julie, Colleen, and I, but great contributions by Liz Upchurch she's just a brilliant, brilliant mind, and such an experience in the opera world, and could just pinpoint the dramatic needs of the work. Mm-hmm. And so I think by August of 2020, I had the final draft. I think we're calling it draft 3 that exists now, that will bring us into the next phase which will lead to production eventually. Mm-hmm. So
amazing. I'm kind of curious because this is not a role that we hear about often in the opera world, but Julie, your role technically as part of this project is as a dramaturg, but also as director. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what it is to dramaturg a piece in opera?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, and it can mean various things depending on the context and the team that you're working with, and what the creators need, what the creators are seeking to do, what sort of space they need, like whether that has to do with physical space, like we need to workshop this in this way, or what type of mental and spiritual space do they need and support. So it can look very different. Like Ian's been saying, it's been very collaborative in terms of the three of us having a lot of jams, like jam sessions on Zoom and in rooms when we were able to be together. And then just asking questions and scribing sometimes, because sometimes Ian and Colleen, in trying to solve something or explore something, they would just start chatting, right? Just start chatting back and forth and talking through things. I always love witnessing Colleen sort of go into the character space, sort of emotionally, and speak from that place, and just sort of scribing and then reflecting back to Ian and Colleen what I'm hearing and observing from what they're doing. And then, like Ian said, collaborating with Liz Upchurch in terms of musical dramaturgy, and what does it mean when we then do the setting to music, and how is that different than when we're just workshopping the libretto in terms of dramatic structure? What does it mean when music comes into the mix, and how fascinating and wonderful that is. And also, and then it starts to bridge into the directing piece as well. Like now we're having conversations with our designers about what the physical space is going to be, where the storytelling happens. And that includes both figuring out what are the hints that we give in the design in terms of letting people know where we are in space, where we are in time, what's the location, who are these characters, characters. And then also there's the audience's experience. So how does that aesthetic and that physical world welcome them from the moment they come into the space? So how do we set up like the seating and things like that? And that's an ongoing conversation, because with COVID and not knowing exactly when we're going to perform this, we don't quite know what we're going to be dealing with spatially in terms of people in the room. So yeah, so there's a lot.
Lots of questions. Julie, can you tell me, I don't know if you're allowed to tell me anything about the design or the concept at the moment, but could you tell us who is on the design team and what the initial plans were?
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate. We have Camelia Koo doing our set and costumes, and then Michael Kangas is doing the lighting. And the carnival aspect is very central to all of this. So the idea of a tent and the idea that of trying to get the audience into that space as well. So it's not just the characters who are in the carnival world, but what can we do so that the audience feels part of it as well? So the idea of that circle, the idea of that tent is a feature in there. Mm-hmm. And then also we have this like beautiful challenge of the different rides at the carnival. So the different corners and places within the carnival that the kids go to. So how do we give some suggestion and some support so that we know when we're in the Haunted Manor versus when we're in the Moon Rocket, for example, is another ride that they go on. But it is contemporary. That's something we can certainly say, is that it's the idea that it's an urban, recognizable urban environment, so that the girls are wearing clothes that you would see young people wear typically. So we certainly want to give a sense of that recognizable, the Toronto that we know and love.
Very cool. What is it the CNE in Toronto? Does it have any resemblance to the grounds?
You've not on the nose in any way, but I know, Colleen, you've mentioned that in terms of atmosphere and how that's. Did you mention the CNE at one point in some of our conversations?
Yeah, I mean it's a smaller carnival, obviously, because it's a portable carnival that travels from place to place. But of course, when you go to the CNE, especially around where the kids' stuff is and the kind of cheesy rides, and the smell of grease and popcorn in the air, I mean, it's the same. I mean, I remember taking my son there when he was little, and it's great. It's great in a weird and wonderful way. And I remember going through a place called the Ghost Ride. Well, I'll never forget it. So, yeah.
Very nostalgic, these kind
of
like super nostalgic for everybody. Ian, I'm kind of curious about the musical language. I've had a chance to check out the score, but can you talk to us about some of the musical influences that shaped different bits of
I mean, it sounds, I guess, well, I mean, this is almost a question more for, I would say, like an Alex, and maybe you can comment at the end of what you think, but everybody always says, like, it sounds very French. So I think like French, there's probably that. And in terms of like the harmonies that I used, like you could probably touch on some Messiaen-ish sounds, but it's a little bit more maybe like familiar sounding than that. Like little bits of Shostakovich-y influence, that kind of thing. Certainly influenced by Britain, just in terms of like vocal writing and care for the voice. So those are some certain influences. But I think I'm a composer that works a lot on instinct. Like a lot of what I do is very instinctual. It's very like I'm inspired by gestures, musical gestures. Like the way I'll write a piece is like bada bada bum, and I'll think of that for a while in my head and bada bada bum, and then I think of what that looks like, because I'm a very visual writer as well. So I like to see what that is instead of just hearing what it is. And then what does bada bada bum move into next? Is it a bah, and is this under it, and like what are the textures? And that's just kind of like builds a thing like building blocks. I think it's like, to describe it also, very vocally focused. So I'm all about a degree of lyricism, but then cutting through the lyricism with a kind of it's not the like, it avoids saccharine, I hope. Like you don't get these like lush, typical movie score-ish progressions. It's like, that'll be a little bit off, and then you're going to get like a major seventh there, and you're going to get like some dissonances. So everything's a little off. That's how I describe my writing.
There must be a grave. We'll find it ourselves. My mom had. She warbles our neighbor's car. Any emergencies? This is an emergency. is this? It's a phone. You can take photos. A photograph. Let's take one together.
One other cool feature of the piece is, and this came up both dramatically and musically, was there is carnival-ish music that I've written into the piece in the carnival scenes. And at one point, our conversation, specifically Julie and Colleen and I, it became clear that that might actually be a character on the stage. And so in the last draft of the piece, we actually wrote an additional character who is a pianist who will be costumed and playing likely a slightly out of tune upright piano on stage in a couple of critical moments. So there's both an offstage, either whether it's a chamber orchestra or a like orchestral pianist, and then there's an onstage character pianist who plays a couple of judicious moments, including a carousel theme where it's this very 3/4 yum bum 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 bum, and this kind of, there's a big octet that runs over top of it at a couple of moments.
Very cool. So which one is Alex? Alex, are you the one on stage or in the orchestra?
That's a good question. I don't know, Ian, you want to tell me?
I think you'd make a great on-stage character. Yeah.
I would love to do that. I think it's possible we might do some switching back and forth. We'll see.
We're very lucky that we have two pianists in the ensemble studio. So Alex and Francis is the other pianist. So we're very lucky that we have an abundance of riches in terms of piano talent to play with, and having the opportunity to play with those two textures, like Ian said, the upright, and then with the sort of not honky tonk, but the slightly out of tune quality.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm constantly thinking about you and Francis being a part of that team in terms of the storytelling. And
of course,
and who you are as individuals and as artists, you know?
Yeah, it's almost it's almost like impossible to separate in a way. Like when you see somebody start to embody a character that you created in a certain way, then they bring another dynamic to it. Then you can't take it away. You know, once we saw Matt opening up the opera, then you just connect Matt to that character inseparably. Absolutely. After that, and then he starts to influence decisions that you make. But has that ever not been the case? I feel like every character, with the exception of maybe like Wagner's, are often influenced by the singers that would come around to make those roles, or singers that the composer already knew that they wanted to write a role for that singer.
Yeah.
I think like I can't think of writing music for a singer without thinking of a singer. And even if it's not the singer that we'll have, or we don't know that they're confirmed, like it's like that voice, that thing that they do, or even that presence that they bring. Like Matthew Cairns is a great example of, like, I mean, he sings our Emile, the carnival barker, and he's just, I mean, it's so distinct. And as soon as he opened his mouth, it was like all the decisions were now like being not shifting, but being tailored. And whether, like, I mean, whether he sings every performance of Emile for all time, probably not, but it has informed it. I think it actually points to the real human nature of opera making. It is very much like all musical things. It's an organic process. You make it with human beings that have human emotions and human voices and bodies, and those voices and bodies and feelings and good days and bad days influence the actual tangible work that you create. And so, and again, as just a comment back to the canon, we think of these works, you know, from say 200 years ago. The work is, we don't have the connecting dots to the creation process. And so we look at them as these sterile things that came out of a person's brain, fully fledged and formed. But when you see and you're part of a process of creation that really touches to the human and the organic and the embodied nature of it, it is very much influenced at every moment by all of the factors that are at play.
Yeah. I mean, coming from a performer's perspective, you know, and as a coach, we're always hoping that performers can really bring themselves to a piece, but with a new work that's literally never been performed before, like that really takes on a new meaning, I mean, you can be your most authentic kind of self because you've never heard this piece, you know, this role interpreted by another person before. It brings it's a big responsibility, and it's also like super exciting.
It's true, because when they come to, for example, we have this draft now of the score that we haven't workshopped yet, the most recent version. We're waiting for the opportunity when we can safely do so. And at the moment that we do, they will create sound that has never been made in the history of the world.
And that's the great thing about creating shit, right? It's like we bring into existence that which has never existed before.
Yeah.
And then everyone comes into that. Everyone helps make it. We all, and in this kind of art form, of course, it exists as it's living, right? It exists in the moment. And that's, I just think that for me as a writer, you know, that's kind of what I live for, is that process. Yeah. And sometimes you do have times where you have to drag something into existence, and it's like getting, you know, blood from a stone. And other times, you know, you're working like we did with a great team of people, and it slowly starts to create itself. It becomes itself through the act of what everyone brings to it of themselves, right? And that's incredible, and it's pretty rare.
I will say also that not all creative teams are always as willing to be influenced in their vision or to change things about their original ideas as you guys are. So Ian and Colleen, you've both been so generous with your crediting of everybody else in helping to create this thing and saying that it's a collaborative creation. And I agree with you, and I hope that that spirit lives on in future creation of new works of opera. But not everybody is always as generous with those credits as you guys are, or just in being willing to, or brave was a word that Julie used earlier that I really appreciate, brave enough to take those ideas from others and see them as potentially valuable.
But, you know, I have to say, Alex, I don't think it's about bravery or any of that stuff. You know, when we take the kind of ego, like the ownership or the possession, like, oh God, that's my word and it's holy. And I'm sort of like personally, deeply and profoundly invested in that sentence. Like, you have to look at, I mean, my job as a playwright is to serve the work, to serve the text, right? To serve the idea, to serve, in this case, the opera, which has many more elements than just words. And so if I can't do that, and even when I'm in rehearsal with a play that, let's say, that only I have written by myself, and I'm in rehearsal, I'm with a director, I'm with a lighting designer, I'm with, you know, a bunch of actors, I have to serve, you know, the production of the play in 3 dimensions. So there are some playwrights who say, oh man, you have to serve me. You have to serve everything that I've written exactly as I want it. And that's fine. You can be like that. I mean, I am like that in film, and I am like that sometimes. But I have been around long enough and had enough experiences to know that when you actually serve the whole, that whole becomes a stronger, more of itself, and it serves you then also and everybody involved in it. And for me, that's part of that dragging something into existence, and it serves the piece more than my ego would serve it.
But
if
I think
if
what you
I
said
can say that right.
Yeah, I think what you said at the beginning, though, the setting aside of the ego does require a pretty impressive internal strength.
Yeah, I would say, like, and I learned so much in the creating of this piece from Colleen, and part of our conversations, you know, Colleen, we talked so much about the work. It was about the work. And so ideas it's amazing how when your focus becomes the work and not like, how will I be perceived, or what are my needs in this, or what, like some weird like ego focused thing, it's so much easier to generate ideas. It's so much easier to take an idea, hold it, look at it, and maybe toss it, maybe put it on the shelf for a few minutes. You become much more flexible in the creative process. And I remember there was one workshop, I think it was the March workshop. I went in and I felt like a little child. Like I was like scared, I was like shaking, and partly because here's this work that has never been heard and it's about to be like sung, and there's like people from the organization that commissioned it that are sitting watching it. And I looked at Colleen and she was like sitting there like a cool cucumber, totally chill. And she's like, no, this is what we do. This is like, and things we would be like, that doesn't work. Okay, it's gone. Da-da-da. And it was so apparently easy. And that was actually very informative in terms of realizing, oh, right, like I can relax a lot more in this and be completely open to offers being made in the room from like 20 different sides and be like, okay, let's try it. And sometimes it would be like, I don't think I love it. I think let's try this other thing, or let's go back to the original and try it a different way. So you can still say no to suggestions, but man, the ideas that flow and then the sense of like dynamism, like dynamic nature of the room, it totally changes, and when you chill out. So I've learned to relax a lot. So thank you, Colleen.
You're welcome.
I mean, there's such a huge element of risk taking. I mean, there's risk involved in putting on any opera, any production, no matter how many times it's been seen, but there's certainly a heightened level of risk inherent in creation, and you know, it exists at all levels, probably from, you know, composer, librettists, commissioners, dramaturg, all the way down to performers, and wanting to make it a thing. Yeah, very cool.
I feel like that same flexibility and openness is like a necessary energy in the future of opera and opera creation, where it might have been very absent or lacking in the past. It seems to be very much the spirit of the future, or at least I hope. This dynamism, as you said.
I think the great thing for us to take away is like there's no one way.
Yeah, totally.
Like, not just what we create is ours to discover, but also the ways in which we create are ours to discover and ours to build, and to figure out what works and what lends to a result that we're really excited about. I hope that those tuning in today take that to heart, and sort of, we hope this empowers you to just really think about like how do you want to create, what do you want to create, and just to know that the rules are yours to write.
Incredible. Awesome words to wrap up our session. For those of you just tuning in, there is a part 2 with McIsaac moderating a panel on co-creation as engagement, or engagement as co-creation, with Sarah Forestieri, Makenzie Morgan, and Christine Sutcliffe, also from the COC. So thank you, Ian, Alex, Julie, Colleen. This has been really special. And thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second half of our conversation. In the first half, we looked at the creation of Fantasma, so really focusing on the work itself. And now we're going to be opening up the scope of that conversation to take a look at some activity at the COC that has preceded Fantasma, and also activity that's currently happening around Fantasma and that will continue to happen around it as we move forward, gearing up for that production. And to do that, we've invited some more voices into the conversation. I'm really grateful to be surrounded by some of my dear colleagues here from the Community Programs and Partnership team at the COC. And in just a moment, I'll invite them all to speak about what they do and their connection to opera for young audiences. But just before I do, I want to give a special shout out to this team because they're working on things that aren't necessarily loud, they aren't necessarily super visible to the public, but in my experience and my estimation, it is necessary and meaningful work. So I'm really grateful for everything that they do. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sarah to begin. And as we go around the group, I'll just invite everyone to speak about their artistic practice and or their role at the COC and also their connection to opera for young audiences. So Sarah, start us off.
My name is Sarah Forestieri, and I've been working at the Canadian Opera Company since May of 2019, and I'm the manager of community programs and partnerships, which means that I run a lot of our community education and engagement programs, mainly working with children and youth and their family, as well as our roster of teaching artists. And my first encounter with opera for young audiences was last year's production of Hansel and Gretel, which was a bit different than our typical opera for young audiences in that it was the first time that this production was presented on the main stage at the Four Seasons Center. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. With regards to Fantasma, though, I feel really grateful to have been working on this project from a community engagement perspective for about a year or so now. And that has been really helpful in my process and in planning to ensure that when we do welcome youth and their families to see this show, we're creating a really welcoming space for everyone who walks through our doors.
Thank you, Sarah. Why don't we turn it over to Makenzie next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Makenzie, and I'm the interim manager of organizational programs and partnerships at the COC. I love to design and develop curriculum that essentially helps to implement and execute the vision for all of the partnerships that we work with. So that's really my main role. I've been with the COC since August of 2019, and I started out as an opera teaching artist. Still really love integrating and using that role in some of the partnerships that I work with now, and also moved into this managerial role in the fall of 2020. In terms of my relationship with opera for young audiences, I was involved with the Hansel and Gretel production that was done last year and helped to facilitate and prepare the groups for the main stage.
Thank you. And Christine, why don't we hear from you next?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Christine Sutcliffe. I'm an opera teaching artist at the Canadian Opera Company, where I have the amazing opportunity to share my love of opera with young people. For several years, I have worked with the Summer Opera Camps team, developing programming for participants and volunteers both. At Summer Opera Camp, students from grades 1 to 12 create and perform original operas, and I've supported that process as well as coordinating the volunteer program. I've also been a teaching artist in the company's after-school opera creation program that has now become Opera Makers. And most recently, I had the opportunity to be a part of a working group for Fantasma, where we considered the ways in which young people might connect with the opera. And that has been a really enriching opportunity, as my first experiences at the COC were actually as a participant in those young audience programs.
Thank you, Christine. And for those of you who are freshly tuning into the second half of the conversation, I'm Julie McIsaac. I am the stage director and dramaturg of Fantasma. I'm also an artist in residence at the Canadian Opera Company in the COC Academy. And it's a pleasure to be here having this conversation with my colleagues today. And thankfully, you've already introduced us to some topics and some ideas that are going to inspire a lot of our conversation today. But to start us off, Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more about the history and evolution of opera for young audiences at the COC?
Definitely. So Opera for Young Audiences is an initiative that was developed in the 2017-2018 season to welcome young people and their teachers and their families to see a full-scale production at the Joey and Toby Tannenbaum Opera Center. And the cast includes current members of our COC ensemble studio, as well as other professional young singers from Toronto and the Greater Toronto area. And the singers perform in full costume with sets and props and piano accompaniment. The operas are typically about 45 to 50 minutes in length, performed in English, and are paired with pre- and post-show engagement activities, such as a question and answer period with the cast following the performance, or interactive installations and workshops in the lobby as the children and their families are entering the space. And so for us, the goal of Opera for Young Audiences is to expose young people, not just to the Canadian Opera Company and the art form, but to dispel any preconceived notions or stereotypes that are often associated with opera. And we want to enforce that idea that opera is accessible at any age, regardless of your previous experience. And opera's just another beautiful and exciting way to share and express stories through art and through music. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, our most recent Opera for Young Audiences production was something a little bit different. The Canadian Opera Company presented a Hansel and Gretel adaptation of the new COC co-production in partnership with the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity in a reduced 90-minute English version. And joining the Hansel and Gretel cast, which was made up of our ensemble studio and the Canadian Children's Opera Company choristers, was 4 community choirs from the Toronto area. And that was the Nye Children's Choir, the Yips Choir, the Common Threads Choir, and the Reaching Out Through Music St. Jamestown Choir. And I have to acknowledge Catherine Semsesson, who's now at the Canadian Children's Opera Company, for her instrumental role in this process and bringing this project to fruition. Much of the success of the community choir, I think, can be attributed to how we're able to break down all this new information that we wanted to share with the young choristers and finding the best way to introduce it to them in such a way that they weren't overwhelmed by the experience. And I think the key to all that being successful was really taking the time to build a relationship with each choir and doing so really early in the process so that everyone was heard and felt comfortable in this, very new experience. And Catherine was really instrumental in that. And another part of this for us was to really empower young people and make them feel prepared for this, rather big performance. So in about the 6 or so months leading up to the performance, we had our COC opera teaching artists go in to visit each community choir in their own space to begin building that relationship, but also to begin working with the children on stagecraft and, what can they expect in the rehearsal process when they walk into the Four Seasons Center for the first time. Julie, you went in to meet each choir and talk to them about the story and the concept for our production, and Makenzie was our music specialist going in to work with each choir musically before, coming to the Opera House. So it was a huge team effort. And Julie and Makenzie, maybe I'll pass it over to you both to talk a bit about that process of preparing the choir for the stage and the impact, on the kids and for you as artists.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking forward for the audience hearing from you, Makenzie, in terms of the work that you did with those young people and how you were such a helpful accomplice in that work in getting them ready for the stage. I'll just give those folks listening a bit more context in this Hansel and Gretel production. So Fantasma is the upcoming Opera for Young Audiences, and as Sarah mentioned, we did this production of Hansel and Gretel last season, and in addition to assisting Joel Ivany on the main stage German version of that, we did this reduced English language version, as Sarah was saying, in which we incorporated over 100 young people on stage for the finale, including all these members of these community choirs. And something that I really appreciated is from the moment I was brought on the project as the assistant director, I knew that this community choirs piece was in the mix. So I knew that we also had this goal in mind and that relationship building and that community building was embedded throughout the process and that we had the time to do that. So in the months leading up, I went in and had a workshop with those young people, as did Makenzie, and she'll speak about that in just a moment. But what was really important important for us is to introduce them to that information bit by bit, so that when they got to the Four Seasons Center on the day that they were going to be on stage, that they'd sort of received as much information as they could ahead of time, one step at a time, so that they could confidently and safely go out there. So I know that when I first met with them, it was about letting them know about the story and the production concept. We had a photo of Derek Bate, who was going to be conducting the performances, so they could get to know who Derek was. We also made a video with the members of the ensemble studio introducing themselves and letting them know, this is my voice type and this is the role I'm going to sing in the opera, just so they could, you know, start to feel a part of that family and get to know all the pieces. And then, yeah, Makenzie, I'll turn it over to you for the work that you did with all those young people prior to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for me, I think one of the most important aspects was preparing them emotionally and just mentally for the process. You know, in education, you talk about preparing the whole student. And in this instance, I really think that you know, preparing the whole singer was a really big component of that. A lot of the students that we saw and the children that we saw, we had some as young as 6 years old. So, you know, to be on that huge stage with over 100 people plus the chorus, to think that some of these students never saw the inside of an orchestra pit before, or, you know, have never been behind stage and all of the wigs and the costumes and the lights, it can be a bit overwhelming for someone who's never kind of had that experience. So just making sure that in those workshops, all of those aspects were kind of introduced, so it wasn't new to them on the day. We also had a lot of students where English was not their first language. And so having that time and space so that they felt safe and they felt brave to perform and to kind of have that experience was really important for me. I know also just preparing workshops, not only for the students, but preparing workshops for the teachers as well, and providing the teachers with tools and strategies to really maximize their student success. Was part of the piece of the pie, so to speak, where I kind of came in and just tried to fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and something I'm so grateful for, Makenzie, is I remember when we finally got those, so we met those young people in their spaces, so in their communities, in their neighborhoods. But then there came a day where they all came downtown Toronto to Front Street to the rehearsal hall, so we could, and they all met each other in person for the first time. But we had done things with photos and videos with them ahead of time, so they could get to know one another. But on that day, Makenzie, just the way you kind of led them through the warm-up, and thereby connecting the activities you've done with them in their neighborhoods, in their communities, so that the transfer to the new space and to the new people, that you'd planted those seeds of the familiar. So that on the day where there was so much new, there was also those things that were familiar. And then again, as you warmed them up every day for the rehearsal, for the performances in the theater as well, the fact that you had those sort of touchstones for them, to me, I think that felt so important.
I think that was a really key factor, just to even have something that felt familiar every day. It also kind of builds that sense of relationship and that sense of, you know, when you feel comfortable with people, you're able to perform at your best. And so just even watching you though, Julie, kind of, you know, simmer through all of the performances and having them kind of stare in awe at, this is the director. And it was beautiful. It was so precious to see, really precious to see.
Well, and I love that you mentioned their comfort and their safety, Makenzie, because I remember not only like the emotional self-confidence, but also the physical safety, right? We had over 100 children down on the apron on the downstage area of the stage with the orchestra pit just there. So, you know, there's a lot of concerns and forethought that goes into it. And on the confidence piece, Sarah, I don't know if you remember this, but there was that little girl who, like, at the end of the curtain call, she did not want to leave the stage. She would have just stayed there bowing and waving but to see that increase in confidence from the first day, from the first rehearsal, to then this young person who says, this is my place, I deserve to be here, I'm going to hold this space and take this stage. And I just hope that feeling stays with her, you know, as she grows up and becomes an adult, so that she knows, yes, the opera stage is for you, yes, the opera house is for you. So here's hoping. So I'm going to shift tacks a little bit here and sort of take us back to Fantasma. So in Fantasma, so it's very different than the Hansel and Gretel project, but again, we have the opportunity to involve community stakeholders and young people in the creation process. So, and what we've done to enable that is we invited them to an in-person workshop that we did with the members of the ensemble studio singing the roles. And we did that back in early March. Lucky us, we got it in just under the wire before things, of course, shifted dramatically. And then, of course, when the pandemic did hit, we were able to shift that work online and in a digital format. So we're grateful for that too. So Sarah, could you tell us a little bit about this, this project with the young people, the community engagement around Fantasma, and what the COC has been able to learn from that experience?
Definitely. Yeah, we wanted to take everything that we learned from the Hansel and Gretel community project and bring all that into us with this new commission. And it was really important, or it was apparent that it would be really important for us to work with our community stakeholders as early as possible in the development phase of the project, so that we, as I'm meaning the community programs and partnerships team, could ensure that we were supporting the teachers and families who will potentially be bringing their children to see an opera for the very first time. And especially on a show, or with a show like Fantasma, where there is some difficult subject matter, we wanted to begin this feedback process as early as possible. So when we had our first in-person workshop in March, as Julie mentioned, we invited a number of teachers just to hear and participate and get a sense of their first impressions, and maybe, you know, what would be some of your concerns if you were to bring your class to see this opera. We also consulted with a number of young people as well. At the live workshop, we invited a number of choristers from the Canadian Children's Opera Company to attend and hear their immediate thoughts and reactions. And then in the second workshop, which ended up being digital, we invited a number of youth ranging in age from 15 to about 23, you know, who either participated in other programs at the Canadian Opera Company, some of our summer camp participants, and teaching artists like Christine to hear their thoughts and reactions. And especially with the first workshop in March, the community members and teachers had an opportunity to share their thoughts and reactions, first with our school programs manager, and then later on with Julie and the creative team. And I think at first, our team was a little bit, you know, worried that some of our school partners might not feel comfortable, you know, being open and candid with the creative team, but that was not the case. They contributed to such an interesting and deep conversation about the work. And it's my impression, at least, that over the course of the development of the work, the creators, Ian and Colleen, have really taken those conversations and ideas to heart. So it's been wonderful to see how valued our community members' contributions have been, not just to us on the community programs and partnerships team, but to the creative team as well. And for us on the education side of things, especially after the digital workshops in May, it's been really helpful to have additional conversations with the teachers about, you know, the importance of having, you know, a structured post-show experience, thinking about how can we best set the students and the children and all their families, set them best up for success as they come to see an opera, so that they have a positive experience and will want to come back to opera as teenagers or adults. And how can that post-show experience lay the foundation for the teachers so that when they go back to their classrooms, you know, they can continue to build on these conversations. And especially with this particular work, what kinds of guiding materials can we provide for the classroom teachers to prepare their classes beforehand, you know, giving that extra support to process this material. And it was also really interesting for us to experiment with different ways of receiving feedback. For example, we learned that our community partners and teachers really enjoyed and appreciated that opportunity to share directly with the creative team. But in working with some of our youth participants, I think we were able to have much, you know, deeper conversations in smaller groups with other participants who were similar in age, and this actually worked out really well in the digital space. In the Zoom room, we were able to have some really meaningful conversations. You know, Christine and Julie, you were a part of a lot of those. So lots of learnings for us, and all in all, you know, incredible, valuable experience. You know, going digital and pandemic aside, and ensuring that we're going to be able to create an accessible, safe space for young people to experience the story of Fantasma and leave them wanting to come back and have a relationship with opera, beyond Fantasma as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sarah, it's so apropos that you've mentioned that pipeline to us in a way, in the sense of really wanting those young people to have a positive experience. So hopefully they keep coming back, and then they sort of grow up through the canon and through operatic practice. And here we have Christine, who had the opportunity to be a part of that, one of those Fantasma focus groups for that one, for the 15 to 22 age group. And to that, you brought your perspective as a young person, but also your perspective as a teaching artist, which you are now. But I'd love for everyone to learn a little bit more about how you came to be connected with opera practice, and then we'll get back to the Fantasma piece. But so right now, I'm wondering if you could speak about your first experiences with opera, and what do you think it was about that experience that kept you connected and coming back to the art form?
Absolutely. I remember being drawn to the way that all my individual interests, music, visual art, and storytelling, coalesce in opera, and seeing behind the scenes glimpses into that work and preparation really inspired my own studies in music and my continued appreciation for the operatic art form. And when I was starting my studies in opera, some of the Canadian Opera Company's programs actually offered tickets to see dress rehearsals for students to attend. And that was an incredible experience to see that final step before an opera's opening night, and to see how the team members worked collaboratively to bring all those elements together. And those experiences have really stayed with me, and they've motivated my work today. And I've really wanted to work to support that same early curiosity in the arts.
Mm-hmm. And Christine, I have a follow-up question for you in just a moment, but actually I'm wondering, Makenzie, I'm wondering if you might speak to us a little bit. This is a bit of a surprise question for Makenzie, but I'm really curious, like Christine's just spoken to us about what it was that got her interested and hooked on the art form. And I'm curious about what it was for you as a young person with music or opera.
Yeah, it's interesting how impactful programming is, and seeing that and having that opportunity to access that. So as a small girl, kind of growing up in Saskatchewan, PBS was so crucial, really. And just learning what was going on in other parts of the world. And so it was a PBS special where Jessie Norman was doing like a German Lieder. And I just saw her and was like, this is what I want to do. Like somehow, some way, I have to be involved in that. But again, those PBS programming was totally based on community, totally based on exposure of the classical art form. And even at that early age, they were kind of the pioneers of just showcasing high talent, top talent, but also showcasing representation as well. And I think for me as a young girl, seeing someone who looked exactly like me, and I just remember thinking in my mind at 7 years old, she's a beautiful monster. That was the specific word that I used, and it just stayed with me. Her spirit and her sound stayed with me. And I think the next week my mom enrolled me into voice lessons, and that's how it started for me. So
That's fantastic. And
yeah.
And the fact that it was a PBS special, so something you saw on a screen, I think is a good reminder to us right now, where we're all mourning the loss of the live event. It's good for us to remember that there can be things that happen on a screen through a digital medium that can mean the world to a young person. So I think that's good for us to hold on to. So thank you so much for sharing that story. And going back to you, Christine, so now with the digital feedback session that you participated in that gave you the opportunity to familiarize yourself with Fantasma in its current form, so that was back in the spring, could you share with us what aspects of the work do you think young people might connect with the most?
Yeah, so I think that as an opera designed specifically with young audiences in mind, there's characters that the audience will relate to, recurring leitmotifs that and even an experienced listener can enjoy, and references to the digital age that make the story really relevant to today's opera goers. And the Fantasma team has worked closely with young people throughout this process to hear their perspectives, and I really believe that the opera is responsive to that. So in the digital working group that I had the opportunity to be a part of, the creative team introduced the opera to young people aged 15 to 22, including myself. So I was able to picture myself and my peers at the opera, but I also considered how the students that I teach might connect with Fantasma. And it was actually that conversation, I think, that ultimately really narrowed the age range for the opera, and decided to focus kind of on grades 7 through to high school. And I think that the audience will be able to hear those conversations that I think really actively shape like the final product that they'll be able to see and attend.
Yeah, and thank you, Christine. I think Sarah and I have chatted about this since those focus groups back in the spring, about how the one that you participated in was so essential, so important for us in terms of helping to know what is that target age group. Not to say that all 12-year-olds are the same or all 16-year-olds are the same. We know there's a big spectrum in there, but opera for young audiences can mean so many different things when we think about who are those young audiences. So it was really great to get that feedback from your group. And so speaking about young audiences and doing things with them, Makenzie, you do a lot of work with the Opera Makers program out of the COC, and I'd love for people to learn from you what that is and what to you is the importance of doing that work, and then again, perhaps what it's been like adapting that work for the digital medium. So that's a lot, so just dive in anywhere.
Okay. Well, Opera Makers, was really designed with co-creation in mind, and it promotes collaboration, it promotes community, but also kind of gives a resource for teachers and for educators, not just necessarily in a school setting, but it gives them resources to kind of attack those real world issues that students are facing, but providing an artistic approach and an artistic way of kind of processing that, and giving the students a chance to, to just kind of express what they are feeling and express their views on these very, very important topics through a musical or artistic medium. So that's kind of what is Opera Makers at its core. And I know for me, building sustainable relationships with these partners, is kind of in the forefront as well. So, not just having maybe one program or one day workshop, but kind of really providing time and knowing the schools and knowing the educators who are really a part of this work, for me is a really exciting part. Mm-hmm. In terms of COVID, with this very unexpected layer that we've all had to pivot and move in with, we have put everything online now, and so our programming is entirely digital. It is no easy feat, but finding new technology devices to help us keep the collaboration portion was integral to, I think, the success. So, we love Google. Google, you can never leave us. Jamboard is our friends. I know I've used Canva a lot. Just a lot of these softwares now are just making it so easy to continue to kind of do the work and do the job. So crucial parts of our work. In terms of your second question and the impact of student engagement, I think for me, the impact is tremendous. When even online, even digitally, when students are able to feel safe, they're able to open up and they're going to begin to speak. And when they speak, that allows a sense of autonomy and ownership of their own work. Which to me is very empowering for a young person, for anyone really. If you are able to really kind of stand in your truth and be able to express that in the ways that you want to express it, that's a very empowering thing for a student. And so for me, giving them that license to do that was very, very crucial. A lot of the programs and a lot of the partnerships that we're working with, a lot of these kids have complex needs, and it's a way Opera Makers almost provides a source of processing those complex needs, and just giving them a space to do that in. A big part for me also is showing the authentic role, and showing that the student voice is really at the forefront of all of the work that we do. It's not about, you know, ulterior motives. It's really about what are the students are feeling, and how can they create that, and how can they move through that. And really, that is really what is the heart of inquiry-based learning, right? Like just taking children from where they are and learning from them. And for me, understanding those strengths, and then building and designing from that is so crucial. You know, in education, we talk about culturally responsive teaching, which is basically highlighting their diversity, their thoughts, seeing things from the students' frames of reference. For me, having that be equitable and having that be inclusive is so important, and it's very empowering. And the students are really beginning to respond to that. We see that in all of the different programmings that we have kind of running simultaneously at the same time. Sarah's nodding because it's so, you know, you can't plan that. You can't expect that. You have no idea what a group of students in one side of the city is going to feel versus, you know, a totally other group of students in another side. And so giving them that space to find it their way, and to see it their way in their eyes. That's really what equity is, that, you know. And so and that's why all of this programming can be so different. We can use the same devices, you know, we can use the same similar formats or frameworks, but the end goal is so different because the students are so different, and being able to kind of celebrate that diversity, for me, is so important to have that. Another thing that I really love about Opera Makers and this whole process and how it's so crucial is that it's also providing access to, you know, I spoke about access, you know, just watching PBS, but a lot of the programming that we're working with and the communities that we're working with are underserved. And so being able to open that door and show them the possibilities, hey, we are inviting you, and we're not telling you what you need to know. We're not telling you what you need to see. We're going to show you where to see, and then you go and find it and tell us what comes back. To be a part of that cycle, that give and take is a bigger, it's more than us. It's more than Opera Makers. And it's part of a bigger plan, and it's very exciting. I hope we're able to continue to reach that.
Yeah, thank you, Makenzie. And I love what you said about it being, there's this flexibility to the container of the Opera Makers program. So while it is a program and while there is a format that is right now being delivered digitally, there's this awareness that if you go into different communities in different parts of the city, and depending on the age of the participants and what they're dealing with, especially right now, that the content and the process might move around. There's some fluidity to it, it sounds like.
Completely.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And Christine, I'd love to hear you speak about a different format of youth programming that's happened at the COC in the past, which is the summer camps program. And looking ahead to this summer, we're not quite sure yet what is going to be possible or not, but in your experience working with the summer camps, what have been some of your takeaways from that, which I understand is a more intensive and condensed than the Opera Makers program, which is more long-ranging. But tell us about your summer camps takeaways.
So at summer opera camps, everyone enters the program at the beginning of the week with different levels of artistic experience. So for some, summer opera camps is their first exploration of opera, but others are already dedicated performers and opera goers. But regardless of this, and what I think is so wonderful about the program, is that at the end of the week and in as little as 5 days, all the students come together to present one project. And like Makenzie spoke to with opera makers, that's made possible with the hands-on approach to young audience engagement. And participants in summer opera camps create each element of the opera themselves, from the story and the libretto to the music, staging, and design. And they're learning from opera teaching artists who specialize in each domain. But that approach really allows each student to find their unique strengths and develop those interests. And I think that's when co-creation becomes an avenue through which participants find their voice and their strengths, and they share it through artistic means.
Thank you for that. And Sarah, taking into account all these different programs and all the learning from past opera for young audiences, can you speak about the future planning that you're doing right now around Fantasma? So what does the future look like for opera for young audiences?
So for us right now, as the Community Programs and Partnerships team, we're in the process of ideating on the pre and post-show experience, as well as those supplementary materials that we wanted to provide to our audiences before the show, and that's for for young people, for teachers, and their caregivers as well, because we invite families. We have family performances as well. It's not just schools that come. And again, because we've identified that there are themes that we want to be just mindful of and how they're unpacked after the show, we're doing a lot of thinking around how can we best break down what the audience has just witnessed and felt, and help them process that experience in a positive way. So we are also reaching out for professional support to work alongside us. We're going to be consulting with social workers and music therapists as we design these materials, recognizing that I'm not a professional in that field, and so accessing that type of support at this stage in the game is really important to us. And that's really where we're at in our process right now, and looking forward to keep working on this project. Yeah.
And something I can share with those who are tuning in is that the word co-creation has come up so much because it's at the heart of a lot of the programming that is going on. But I feel so fortunate in that I get to co-create alongside, Ian and Colleen, and alongside the designers who are going to come on board and create the physical space in which Fantasma happens. But I'm constantly asking myself the question, how can the audience on the day be involved as a co-creator? What can they do on the day in their experience in the venue that allows them to feel like they've had a co-creative contribution to the piece? So that's something I'm thinking about too, in terms of their experience from the moment they arrive at the theater, taking their seats, witnessing the performance, and then, like you said, Sarah, the post-show activity or the post-show experience, and how we usher them out of the storytelling, and before they leave, before they go home or back to the classroom, what does that look like? And how can we both take care of them and maximize their participation while they're with us?
Yeah, thinking of the whole experience, like, so holistically. It's not just the show, it's not just the talk after the show, it's the moment you walk in the door. How do we make people feel welcome? How do we make people feel like opera is for them? So yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, Julie. Thanks.
Well, and I want to thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts with us here today, and also for the work that you're doing every day. I know Makenzie and Sarah, you are actively making that Opera Makers program happen, and Christine, you're contributing your artistry as well. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and will continue to do over the next months and years. And thank you to all of you who've tuned into our conversations today. If you're curious and want to learn more about the programs that we're chatting about, and if you want to stay on top of what's happening with Fantasma, I'd invite you to take a little trip over to coc.ca/opera everywhere. And a lot of the programming that's happening right now happens to be free. So take a look through there and see what piques your interest. And if you also want to stay on top of things, you can sign up for our e-opera newsletter, which is coc.ca/eopera. And then you'll be sure to hear about the latest and everything that we're doing. So thank you for spending this time with us today. It's been a pleasure. Stay safe, everyone.